to the Steep podcast. My name is Dr. Shirah Z. Mansaray, and I'm an associate lecturer at University College London within the Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy Department, which I'll refer to as Steep throughout this episode. I am a lawyer by training and have come full circle as I was once a master's student at Steep, and then I was fortunate enough to secure a scholarship from the Engineering and Physical Science Research Council to study my PhD in mental well-being, innovation, and architecture. I'm pleased to have completed my PhD now, and I get to lecture within the STEEP department with colleagues who I've come to respect and who I also feel are very inspirational. I'm delighted to host the STEEP podcast and welcome all our listeners to our academic and policy community. For those of you who are new to STEEP, this is the Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy Department. STEEP brings together policymakers, industry and academia to design innovative solutions to society's biggest challenges. STEEP collaborates closely with external decision makers to ensure that we are asking the relevant questions and addressing real needs through our education and research programs. Our vision for the podcast is to curate a community of professionals and students who are up for changing the world for the better. And I'm very pleased to have Aleyna here today. Aleyna, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks so much, Shirah, and thank you for that really in-depth introduction. So I'm a policy advisor at the Policy Impact Unit. I lead on all things circular economy, net zero and sustainability related. And just to give your listeners a bit of a context about who the PIU are, we were set up in 2018. We're based at the Department of Science, Technology, Engineering and Public Policy at UCL. But we work with researchers all across the Faculty of Engineering Sciences. And our role is about designing bespoke policy engagement strategies to ensure that all that research that's being developed across the faculty is able to shape and inform policy making, and that policymakers can use this evidence and insight when making those decisions.
Thank you. So our question that we always ask all our guests, if you had to explain your work to a 10-year-old in one sentence, how would you do that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So how would I explain my job to a 10-year-old? I would say that I help researchers, scientists and engineers to share their ideas in a way that decision makers, such as those that make policy, can understand and use. And in simple terms, it's like being a translator who changes complicated information into clear messages so that people can make informed decisions.
Great. The first question as well for our guests and our listeners, you've worked across government, consultancy, and now within academia at UCL. What has surprised you the most about these sectors' approach to innovation and policy? And how do you see your role bridging these worlds?
Yeah, so I'll take your question in a few parts, and I'll start with what I see as the most obvious and common thread that I see running across these three different worlds. So for me, it's the translation piece. And what I mean by translation is when we turn detailed information, whether that be complex research or technical ideas, into clear and useful information that your audiences can understand. So, for example, in my current role as a policy advisor, we try to bridge that gap between the worlds of policy and academia by translating detailed evidence into clear and actionable insights that decision makers can use practically to shape, various policies and programs. And this is not too dissimilar at what might happen at a local level, for example, where your audiences in that context are local residents or communities. Or in a consultancy, the audience is really your client. So you're translating the work that you've done, whether that might be, primary or secondary research, or, you've just conducted some focus groups or data analysis, and you tie that in with your brief and what your client is looking for with their needs. So I think translation is definitely the first piece. The second common thread I see is really about collaboration. So across these three worlds, I think there's a real emphasis on breaking down siloed ways of working, whether that be across geographies or departments, and fostering collaboration that can create meaningful change. So it could be, like you said, at the local government level, it could be about, co-designing and engaging residents and communities so that their voices are included in the development of various initiatives or programs. Or in our case at the PIU, we host regular knowledge exchange workshops and events so that we really create that space for stakeholders, whether that be policymakers or industry or academics, to do a deep dive on some, specific issues and tackle them collaboratively. So I think that those two things really are quite key pillars to the work that I do now. And it's something that ties in through all of the work at the PIU, whether it's, to do with written outputs or again, it's hosting events. Particularly because things like collaboration, are important when we're tackling complex problems. Those require joined up thinking. They require different experiences and perspectives and skills to develop solutions that actually, have a real impact.
Thank you. And just to pick up on some of the key concepts you've discussed. So definitely joined up thinking is important, and what that means for our listeners who might not necessarily have a clear understanding of that. This is where we are encouraging different voices to feed into the discussion or the debate or even the activity in question. And the other element here is the co-creation exercise that happens and how we ensure that co-creation does foster inclusivity, because sometimes you have co-creation exercises, whether that's in academia or policy, but then those voices are not necessarily fed into the final output. And again, whether that's a policy brief or a literature output, it's important that even where co-creation and joined up thinking happens as a mechanism, that we're also ensuring those final outputs are inclusive and they do contain those multiple voices. So the other question I had to ask you is, you've previously worked and you've mentioned a very strong belief in the role of evidence-based insight in improving decision making. How do you handle moments when the political or policy climate isn't receptive to the evidence you're helping to deliver?
Yeah, I think you would have heard the saying that a week is a long time in politics. So I think it's important to understand that the policy landscape is constantly evolving and it's changing. And there will probably be times when your evidence or research might not get picked up because there are just other priorities or crises that, take precedence. And, something that we constantly try and tell people is actually policymakers are really busy people. It might not be anything personal or intentional. It's simply that the policy landscape is so busy that they simply just don't have the time. So I think the way that we kind of approach policy engagement, knowing that this landscape is so complicated and busy, is by having a long-term strategy. It's policy engagement is something that requires quite a bit of persistence and consistency and using tools within our disposal. So whatever we have within our policy making toolbox to ensure that we're getting that reach. And that might mean, kind of more proactive stuff like hosting workshops, for example, or doing stakeholder engagement, or it could be the more reactive stuff. So you're waiting for a window opportunity. It could be the announcement of a new strategy or the announcement of the spending review, and you're waiting for that window of opportunity to do some more of that reactive engagement. But I think it's also about, the policy landscape is very broad. It's not just made up of central government. It's also made up of other actors within that system. And it could be, broadening out your engagement to local government, for example, or NGOs or, other public bodies or arm length bodies. So really kind of understanding that there are different ways to engage, and there are different tools that you can use to do that. And I think as an example, kind of when you are doing this work, not to be discouraged if you're not getting immediate results is, there's been incidences at the PIU where we've, developed a policy brief in 2020 and, 4 years later, actually it got picked up. So what I mean by this is it's an example that demonstrates that actually policy engagement is not linear. There's often change that happens, and not to be discouraged, not to publish something, even though it's not getting, that instant kind of, it's not getting instantly picked up. So, yeah, I think the thing that's important to remember here is it's definitely a long-term strategy, and ensuring that you've got a good grasp of the various voices that make up that policy system, so that you can also, in those moments when you're not getting the reach that you might desire, you can actually diversify and engage other stakeholders too.
Great, thank you. So, from your perspective, what makes for a meaningful policy engagement experience and not just a tick box exercise? And how can researchers better prepare themselves to contribute to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think for any researcher who takes the leap to start policy engagement, I think that's a huge achievement in itself. We know that academics and researchers are actually really busy people. They might have teaching responsibilities, Shirah, as you know. There might be grant writing proposals, there might be conferences, a whole host of things. So for any researcher or academic that actually takes the leap into policy engagement, yeah, like I said, I think it's a great achievement. But how to kind of begin deepening that and ensuring it's not just a tick box exercise is, I think, starting early. So preparing and embedding policy engagement into your schedule and into your grant proposals from the very beginning, so that it's not a bolt-on or an afterthought. And actually, because due to the reasons that I've mentioned, where it is such a long-term, policy engagement is such a long-term strategy, that starting early and embedding it from the very beginning of a project ensures that there is that consistency throughout, whether that project is a year or 5 years. I think the second point is around clarity. So being really clear about what is the purpose of your engagement. And that goes back to the translation piece that I talked about. So when you are engaging with policy stakeholders, it's, brevity, having clarity, being concise in how you write and how you speak, avoiding jargon, for example, and also having a clear agenda, turning up to meetings with a clear agenda and an ask of what it is that you want to achieve. I think the other thing is really around quality versus quantity. So, you could easily spend probably a whole working week, day in and day out, just submitting consultations. But if that's not, if it's not targeted and, it's not actually getting the impact that you want, you have to weigh up whether that's really, a strategy that's creating the meaningful change that you desire. So I think there's an element of, considering how those consultation responses and how that engagement, really ties into some practical things and is conducive to the current policy environment, so that the recommendations you're making are actually, realistic and actionable, instead of just submitting things for the sake of it. And I think, just the last thing is really about, being willing to adapt and being flexible to, how the policy making process is constantly evolving and changing. And if there are, especially for listeners who are based, at STEEP or the Faculty of Engineering, we've got a bunch of resources at the PIU, especially examples of how to write a policy brief or, various toolkits on how we host events. So there are definitely ways for, for researchers or academics to do some upskilling on policy engagement too, and it's kind of being open to doing those things too.
Perfect, thank you. And our final question is, if you could redesign the policy research interface from scratch, what would it look like? Are there any ideal conditions or structures you think are missing in the current system?
Oh, Shirah, I wish I was an architect, but I definitely can't design anything from scratch. I wish I could. But I think what I will say is that there is real value in having academic policy engagement embedded from the very beginning into grant proposals and not as a bolt-on. And for the reasons that I mentioned, where academics and research teams are, busy and have other constraints that might be preventing them or hindering from actually doing that policy engagement, because it is a full-time job and it does require specialist skills. So having a dedicated policy advisor or policy person on that team who can do some of that heavy lifting and who can do some of that policy engagement work, so that the researchers and academics can actually focus on the stuff that they want to focus on. I think that is really essential, and perhaps to have more of that and see that increase, and not just be as a kind of example of disparate examples dotted around, but actually in a more systematic way to have that policy engagement. I think it's really important to also know that policy teams like this are still a relatively new thing, and there's been an increasing awareness and I think an understanding of the benefit that brings for the reasons mentioned above. Taking the load off academics and also realizing that it is a specialist skill. So I think there's something around doing a bit more awareness raising about the work that people like myself do and the value that it brings, and showcasing actual real practical examples where that change was achieved. And I think the other part of it is, demystifying policy engagement to academics and researchers. It's, again, like I said, it might not be something that they are necessarily familiar with or have thought about, or maybe they did, but they just don't know where to start. So I think it's really kind of also crucial when we think about what would this, policy and research interface look like. Thinking about, the people right at the heart of it, which is the academics and researchers. Do they understand what it is? How can we demystify and explain it to them so that they have an idea of what it is that we do and the impacts that can be achieved through it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. That was fascinating. I think for me, just really summing up for our audience, it's important for researchers to have this policy interaction and also interface within the wider sector. But I also imagine for, students who are looking to either come to study at STEEP or reconsider their links to policy and academia, it's important to reflect on the critical engagement modes and also the issue of ensuring that your research has the most value to the most suitable audience. So yes, thank you very much, Aleyna. Any final thoughts for you before we wrap up?
No, I think that was, what you've summarized was really comprehensive, especially I guess for any academics or researchers who are thinking about policy engagement, especially if they're based within UCL at the Faculty of Engineering, please do reach out to the Policy Impact Unit. We're here to help